One of the things I think is interesting about all of these movies is even though you're writing in an incredibly political time, you're writing about an unbelievably political subject, it doesn't feel, and I suspect this is probably intentional, that you're imposing or your voice as a political person is not imposed on the narrative. And I wonder, as you're writing, if you have to deliberately separate yourself from the narrative you're trying to tell, and how as a writer you're able to kind of do those things simultaneously.
And I had a writing partner who's a very talented novelist. I think it's a constant challenge because, you know, particularly in Boys Don't Cry and in this movie, the last thing I wanted to do was feel at all like we were imposing any kind of politics rather than entertaining and engaging the audience as deeply as possible inside the main characters. But when you're dealing with really political issues, I think it's that challenge of how do you put it on the page without making it kind of hit people on the head. And at least we found if the characters were willing to have those conversations, that was somewhere you could go. Do you know what I mean? If that was something, because if you pulled it out, then you found, well, when I would hang out with my brother and all the different soldiers, it's like they did talk politics. You know what I mean? They did have arguments, and that was generally our line of reasoning. It's like if those were arguments that they actually had to have to tell their own story to one another, then that was where it came in for us. That was our rule, kind of.
I have one last question I want to ask everybody on the panel. I don't know about HBO's ratings, but I know that as acclaimed as your movies have been, the audience seems
don't even go there, John.
disinclined to engage the topic. And I wonder if that is upsetting to you as filmmakers. Do you feel like you're whistling in the dark? What is it going to take for people? Or do you already think you're part of the cultural conversation?
I mean, it's an interesting perspective because I also, you know, can be appreciative in that way that I got to make the movie. You know, I ended up going around the country with it. You know, certainly a lot of people saw it. I think the hardest thing for me was because it followed a number of movies that didn't do well. I do like thousands of interviews. We all do when we release a movie. And over, the journalist said to me, what the hell are you going to do? All these other movies failed. What are you going to do? And I just was like, that was such a hard place to start the conversation because I said, you know, my movie plays pretty well. It should do okay. But it's when you start positioning these movies as, oh, it's part of this long line of things that haven't worked. I think that tag really is unfortunate because I think if you let the movies be these individual pieces, they probably, I think, would do better. Because I think if you sold them individually as the stories that they are, I just think that you could get a broader audience. And in particular with my movie, you know, Paramount got really scared about the movies that failed before it. And then they actually sold it as a teenage movie. At the very last minute, it was a Paramount movie. It should have been an adult drama, which wouldn't have been surprising coming from me. Had good actors. But at the last minute, they gave it to MTV Films, and it was released as an MTV film. And it was like completely confusing to everybody, and they sold it as sexy teenagers.
From the makers of Jackass.
It was utterly, and it was a panicked response, and that was really just a heartbreak for me because suddenly my audience didn't even know, they didn't even see that it was from me. What they just saw was it's an MTV movie. So I think that hysteria about box office is actually really kind of deadly.
Right. Well, maybe when Mark's movie wins the Best Picture Oscar, it'll change the conversation.
We can re-release.
Yes.